No one expected that the person most looked down upon would one day take control of everything. Sophie Bennett, an ordinary girl working as a waitress at Riverstone Diner, was constantly overlooked, underestimated, and treated as invisible. But when she showed kindness to a seemingly insignificant customer who later turned out to be the owner of the restaurant chain, her life changed completely. This is the story of how a seemingly small woman turned the tables and reclaimed the power she deserved. The atmosphere inside Riverstone Diner was filled with the familiar Saturday night bustle. The scent of seared burgers and crispy fries hung thick in the air, blending with the sharp aroma of freshly mopped floors. The cash register rang constantly as orders poured in, while the kitchen crew shouted over each other, trying to keep up with the growing line of customers stretching to the door. Sophie Bennett wiped the sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand, adjusted the strap of her white apron, and balanced a tray of food in one hand. Her legs ached, and her shoulders were stiff after hours of standing, but she couldn't stop. The heavy flow of customers demanded non-stop movement. Any delay would throw the entire service counter into chaos. She weaved her way through the narrow aisles, dodging crowded tables filled with families and night shift workers enjoying their meals. At the end of the counter, Lily lounged against the register, lazily twirling a strand of her blonde hair with one hand, while absent-mindedly punching buttons with the other, chatting animatedly with Brandon, the lazy bartender. Neither seemed to care about the growing line of customers. Only, when a well-dressed man, a gold watch gleaming on his wrist, approached, did Lily suddenly spring to life, flashing a bright smile as if witnessing a miracle. "I'll take care of this one," she chirped, straightening her uniform and flashing a flirtatious grin. Brandon smirked, and Sophie bit her lip, trying to suppress her frustration. It wasn't the first time she had seen this wealthy-looking customers received priority, while those who looked ordinary or modest were shamelessly ignored. It was an unspoken rule, quietly encouraged by their manager, Derek Collins. Sophie knew better. Speaking up would only make things worse, and she couldn't afford to risk this job, her and her younger brother Evan's only source of income for their struggling lives. As she returned to the counter, a middle-aged man walked in through the glass door. He was simply dressed, a neat shirt, dark slacks, hands casually tucked into his pockets. His gaze was calm, unreadable, but the moment he stepped in, Sophie sensed a subtle shift in the restaurant's atmosphere. No one bothered to greet him. Lily gave him a fleeting glance before turning her full attention back to the man with the gold watch. Brandon pretended to be busy with the ketchup bottles. Derek, lurking near the kitchen door, gave a cursory glance and quietly turned away. Sophie clenched her jaw. The deliberate snub was silent but undeniable. The man patiently stood there, hands still in his pockets, eyes calmly observing everything. Seconds dragged on heavily, and it was clear no one intended to serve him. Taking a deep breath, Sophie set down her tray and stepped forward. "Good evening, sir. Welcome to Riverstone Diner. How may I assist you?" she said warmly. The man turned his gaze locking onto hers for a brief moment. Then his lips curved into a gentle smile. "It's refreshing to finally be noticed." He said, his voice deep and warm. The crowd had begun to thin. The smell of grilled meat still lingered, mingling with the faint scent of cleaning solution. A young busboy was wiping down empty tables while occasional clatters still echoed from the kitchen. Sophie glanced toward the entrance and saw the man standing there, composed in every movement. She caught sight of Derek, who was chatting with Lily and Brandon. His face tensed when he noticed the scene unfolding. He muttered something under his breath and signaled to Lily to ignore the man. Lily sighed dramatically, shrugging and turning to serve someone else. Brandon sneered, pouring water with a mocking smirk. "Bet he won't even leave a tip," he muttered. A familiar wave of anger surged through Sophie. Despite witnessing it countless times, she never got used to the way people quietly discriminated. Without hesitation, Sophie approached the man again. "Hello, sir. May I help you with anything?" she asked. He looked at her and gave another gentle smile. "This is the first proper greeting I've heard here," he replied, a glint of amusement in his eyes. Sophie blushed, embarrassed on the restaurant's behalf. "I'd be happy to serve you. Would you like to order now, or would you like me to recommend something from the menu?" He let out a soft chuckle. "I'll go for the classic, a double cheeseburger without onions, crispy fries, and a black coffee." Sophie quickly noted the order, ignoring the burning glare from Derek behind her. She tuned out the mocking whispers from Brandon and the sarcastic looks from Lily. She personally made sure the meal was well prepared. The burger grilled perfectly, the fries crisped just right. When she brought the tray out, the man nodded in approval. "That was fast," he commented. "We always do our best." Sophie replied with a smile. The man lifted the coffee cup, rolling it lightly between his fingers, then looked up at her, his eyes seeming to weigh something. "You have a good work ethic," he said. "Not everyone takes pride in what they do." Sophie was caught off guard by the compliment. "I just believe everyone deserves to be treated with kindness," she said. His smile deepened. "A rare quality," he said thoughtfully. "I think you deserve far more than what you're getting here." Sophie's eyes widened, but before she could respond, he turned back to his meal, leaving her with a whirlwind of thoughts. From afar, Derek quietly observed, drumming his fingers against the counter as if calculating something. And Sophie knew he had noticed, and he was certainly not happy about it. Inside the glass doors of Riverstone Diner, the scent of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon filled the air, blending with the soft morning radio playing from the kitchen. Customers lined up before the counter, waiting for their breakfast, while trays of food slid through the service window in a steady rhythm. But this morning, something felt off. A slow, simmering tension pulsed through every step, sending a chill down Sophie Bennett's spine. Maybe it was because Derek Collins stood at the register with arms crossed, his sharp gaze sweeping across the floor. Or maybe it was the secretive glances Lily and Brandon exchanged by the soda machine. Sophie swallowed hard, tightening the strap of her apron. The events of last night still burned vividly in her mind, how Derek and the staff had deliberately ignored the strange customer. How she had spoken up, despite knowing the risks, fully aware she had made herself a thorn in their side. She wondered, would Derek retaliate? Was she about to pay the price for her honesty? Shaking her head to dispel the negative thoughts, Sophie hurried behind the counter, tying her apron tighter, ready for a long shift ahead. But before she could even clock in, a cold voice rang out Sophie. She looked up and met Derek's empty stare as he stood in the doorway of the office. "Come in." The air seemed to thicken. The fine hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Lily stifling a laugh and Brandon smirking with quiet satisfaction. Taking a deep breath, Sophie followed Derek into the cramped office. The door slammed shut behind her, cutting off all the noise from outside. The small room reeked of stale coffee and damp paper. Derek sank into the chair behind his desk. Fingers interlaced, voice even, "Sit down." Sophie hesitated, then slowly sat, her heart hammering wildly in her chest. Derek leaned forward, exhaling as if discussing something routine. "We've been reviewing staffing needs." A wave of dread rolled through Sophie, and unfortunately, he continued, his voice steady. "We have to make some cuts. Today will be your last day." A blast of cold air seemed to slam into Sophie's chest. She sat frozen as his words dropped like heavy stones. "What?" She croaked, her voice hoarse. "Nothing personal." Derek said, his eyes gleaming with cold satisfaction. "Just restructuring." Sophie fought to steady her breathing, but the diner's always short-staffed. We're constantly understaffed. Derek raised his hand, cutting her off. The decision's been made. No discussion under the table, her fists clenched tight. Injustice flooding her. "If it's not personal, then why me?" she asked, voice trembling but firm. Derek tilted his head, feigning sympathy. "You no longer align with the core values Riverstone Diner upholds, a sweet but poisonous dagger." Barely masking his retribution, Sophie shot to her feet. "Fine," she said stiffly. Derek merely nodded toward the door. Outside, a strange silence hung in the air. Lily stood with arms crossed at the register, a smirk of triumph on her lips. Brandon pretended to fuss with the napkin dispenser, but his eyes gleamed with glee. Sophie walked straight past them, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. She passed the crowded tables, the warm aroma of coffee and fried bacon, until the glass doors swung closed behind her. The morning chill slapped her face, leaving her dazed. She clutched the strap of her bag tightly, trying to stay upright as her mind spun. Fired not for wrongdoing, not for budget cuts, but for treating a human being with decency. Her hands trembled as she fumbled for her phone. Evan. She hesitated for a few seconds before pressing call. 1, 2 rings. Then the familiar, lively voice answered. "Hey, Sophie. What's up?" She parted her lips, but the words caught in her throat. She couldn't worry her brother. Swallowing the lump, she forced a smile. "Nothing, just checking in. Evan, didn't notice anything odd. You're sweet, am about to head to class. Everything okay?" Sophie's gaze drifted to the neon sign of Riverstone Diner behind her. She answered softly, "Everything's fine." A lie. The small apartment was steeped in silence, broken only by the hum of the fridge and the drip-drip of a leaky pipe. The dim light from the desk lamp cast long shadows across the wall. Outside the window, the distant hum of traffic from Atlanta's streets filtered in, but inside everything felt frozen. Sophie sat at the edge of the worn-out sofa, staring blankly at the unopened final paycheck envelope on the table. Dinner sat untouched. She didn't even have the energy to reach for it. She had lost her job simply for doing the right thing. Her fingers absent-mindedly fiddled with the frayed hem of her hoodie. Her mind spun, calculating she needed a new job fast. Rent was due soon. Evan's tuition couldn't be delayed. She could try a cafe, a supermarket, a convenience store, but would the pay be enough? The front door creaked open. Evan walked in, backpack slung low, stretching and sighing. "Hey, Sophie, how was your day?" Sophie quickly mustered a smile. "It was fine. Just a little tired." Evan squinted at her. "You sure? You look kinda off." She waved him off. "I just need some sleep." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Want me to heat up your food?" "I'm not hungry," she said in a tiny voice. He hesitated, then disappeared into his room. The door clicked shut. Sophie slumped onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Her phone buzzed, an unknown number. Her instinct screamed to ignore it, but some strange feeling made her answer. She pressed accept. "Good evening, Sophie Bennett. This is Daniel Hartman." She bolted upright, her hand gripping the phone tightly. "I'm sorry, who?" The man's voice remained calm. We met yesterday at Riverstone Diner. She stopped breathing. It was him, I remember. She stammered, a short silence. I'm guessing you're no longer working there, Daniel asked, his voice deep and steady. Shame rose hot in her throat. That's correct. Not surprising, he said. Then, in that same calm tone, he added, I'd like to hear the full story. See you tomorrow morning. Daniel Hartman's voice came through the phone, calm yet filled with implication. Sophie Bennett frowned, her heart pounding faster. Meet for what she asked. I have a proposal for you, he replied. A proposal. She gripped the phone tighter, confusion flooding her mind mixed with a fragile glimmer of hope. We'll talk in person. I'll text you the location shortly. Daniel added, looking forward to seeing you. The call ended before Sophie could ask anything more. She sat frozen, staring at her phone screen as if trying to find answers there. A strange emotion stirred inside her, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, hope. The next morning, the city air was crisp and cool. Sophie stepped off the bus, blending into the busy flow of people along the central streets of Atlanta. The sidewalks were packed with hurried commuters clutching hot coffee cups, the rhythm of footsteps mixing with the murmur of morning conversations. Sunlight streamed between the tall buildings, glinting off the glass storefronts. Sophie clutched the strap of her bag tighter, heart thudding wildly as she approached a small cafe tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. There were a few outdoor tables facing the busy street. The rich aroma of freshly roasted coffee and warm pastries enveloped her, momentarily softening her nerves. But worry still gnawed at her. This meeting with Daniel Hartman filled her mind with questions. Why would someone like him care about her? Just a small-time waitress with nothing remarkable, and what did he truly want from her? Taking a deep breath, Sophie pushed open the glass door. The bell above chimed softly. Inside the cafe was warm and quiet. A few customers, students, office workers, and a couple of people tapping away on laptops occupied scattered tables. Small wooden tables were neatly arranged, each adorned with a simple vase of white daisies. Soft jazz music intertwined with the gentle hiss of the espresso machine. And then she saw him. Daniel Hartman sat by the large window, a steaming cup of coffee before him. He wore a sleek, dark gray suit, no tie exuding a relaxed yet commanding presence. His eyes caught hers, and he gave a small nod, motioning for her to sit at the chair across from him. Sophie hesitated for just a moment before walking over Sophie. He greeted warmly. She gave a small nod and sat down. Good morning, Mr. Hartman. Just call me Daniel, he said, lifting his coffee cup with a soft smile. Sophie didn't know how to react, so she simply placed her hands neatly on her lap, sitting up straight and waiting. Daniel observed her for a moment, then leaned back in his chair. Do you know why I asked to meet you? He asked. Sophie shook her head honestly. Honestly, I have no idea. A faint, enigmatic smile touched his lips. That's all right. Let me start with a proper introduction. I am the founder and owner of the Riverstone Diner chain. She froze. He was the owner of Riverstone Diner, the very place she had worked, the place she had just been unfairly fired from. She had served him like any other customer, while her co-workers Lily Brandon and even Derek Collins had treated him with disdain. Daniel continued, his voice deep but clear. I often visit my restaurants unannounced. I want to see things as customers experience them without pretense, without a facade. He paused, his gaze sharp. And what I witnessed at your location was deeply disappointing. Sophie felt her stomach twist. Employees cherry-picking who they serve. A manager turning a blind eye to favoritism. some even mocking those they deemed unworthy. He paused again, his eyes softening slightly. But then I saw you. Her heart ached. You didn't hesitate, Daniel said. You treated me like any other guest. You had no idea who I was. You didn't act out of self-interest. You simply did what you believed was right. She bowed her head, feeling a mixture of embarrassment and bewilderment. That, he emphasized, says more about you than any resume ever could. A long silence settled between them. Then Daniel pulled a small leather case from his jacket, retrieved a business card, and slid it across the table to her. I want you to come back to Riverstone Diner. He said. Sophie's mouth fell open. Come back. Not as a waitress. He smiled as a manager. She sat, stunned, manager. She had never led anyone before. She only knew how to work hard and do her tasks diligently. Sensing her doubt, Daniel said calmly, I need someone fair. Someone who doesn't turn a blind eye to injustice. Someone who can change the culture there. He paused, his voice steady. That someone is you. Sophie leaned back, her mind whirling. A flood of worries surged. Lily, Brandon, Derek. They wouldn't accept her easily, but then another thought crept in. If not her, who would do the right thing? I'm not sure I'm capable, she stammered. Daniel smiled sympathetically. No one is born knowing how to lead. A real leader is simply someone willing to take responsibility. He tapped the business card lightly. You can think it over. The decision is yours. But remember, opportunities to change things don't knock twice. He stood, straightening his jacket. If you're ready to stop being controlled and start leading, I'll be waiting with that. Daniel left. Leaving, Sophie sitting stunned, the business card clutched in her hand. 2 days later, Sophie stood before the familiar glass doors of Riverstone Diner. Her reflection stared back at her in a crisp new manager's uniform, a navy blue shirt, and a gleaming name tag, leaving her both dazed and proud. She took a deep breath, gripped the door handle, and pushed her way inside. Inside, the diner buzzed with the usual morning activity, the rich scent of coffee, the sizzle of frying oil, the clanging of the order bell. But then, like a ripple, everything slowed. Lily, wiping down the counter, froze mid-swipe, her cloth suspended in the air. Brandon stood paralyzed by the fryer, nearly dropping a basket of fries. The newer staff, unaware of the backstory, simply looked on curiously, and then heavy footsteps approached from the back. Derek Collins. The heavy footsteps echoed across the tiled floor as Derek Collins stormed in. The moment his eyes landed on Sophie Bennett, his face darkened instantly. His gaze flickered down to her neatly pressed uniform and the new name tag with the word manager boldly displayed beneath her name. His jaw clenched so tightly that Sophie feared he might actually shatter his own teeth. What the hell is going on here? Derek roared, his voice booming through the stunned silence. No one dared to move. Sophie's heart pounded, but she kept her composure, looking him straight in the eye. I'm the new manager, she said clearly. Derek's nostrils flared with fury. No way, he shouted, spinning around. Where's Daniel? I want to see him right now. As if perfectly timed, Daniel Hartman stepped in calmly. He wore a sharply tailored black suit, one hand casually tucked into his pocket, his stride slow and confident. No need to call me Derek. Daniel said coolly, I'm here to talk to you. Derek puffed up his chest, trying to look tough. You can't be serious about this decision. He sneered, jabbing a finger at Sophie. Replacing me with her? Daniel didn't blink. Exactly. Derek let out a bitter laugh, void of any humor. You really think she can manage this place better than me?" "It's not what I think," Daniel replied. "It's what I know." A flicker of confusion crossed Derek's face, quickly swallowed by rage. "This is insane," he bellowed. "I built this place from scratch. You can't just walk in here and—" "Derek, you're fired." Daniel interrupted sharply, his voice like a blade. The words slammed down like a hammer. Derek's face flushed deep red. "You don't have that authority?" "I do," Daniel said calmly, "and I just exercised it." His gaze turned icy. "I've been monitoring this branch for a long time, and what I've seen, favoritism, discrimination, weak leadership ends today." Derek's fists clenched at his sides, his whole body trembling with anger. "You'll regret this," he hissed. Daniel remained utterly composed, but Sophie felt a chill run down her spine as Derek's hatred-filled gaze bore into her. "You think you've won?" "Huh," Derek growled. "You think you're better than me." Sophie didn't back down. "I think this place deserves better than you," she said firmly. For a moment, it looked like Derek might lunge at her, but then he let out a sharp, derisive snort, spun on his heel, and shoved the glass door open. The door slammed shut behind him, leaving a heavy silence hanging in the air. Every eye in the diner turned toward Sophie, Lily, and Brandon exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Without Derek, their shield had collapsed. Sophie took a deep breath and spoke steadily. "I know this is a shock for a lot of you, and I know not everyone is happy. But I didn't take this job to get revenge. I'm here to make this place better." No one replied. Even Lily and Brandon, usually quick with their snide remarks, stayed silent. Daniel nodded in approval, then addressed the staff. "Anyone willing to work the right way has nothing to worry about. If not, the door's right there." No one moved. Daniel turned to Sophie, speaking gently. "Your office is ready." And with that, he walked away, leaving her to face the wary stares. Sophie clenched her fists and made her way toward the back, stepping into the manager's office. Inside the small office, sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting long shadows across the cluttered desk. The air was thick with the smell of stale coffee and damp paper. Sophie sank into the leather chair, feeling the heavy weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders. She had once wiped tables, carried trays, scrubbed counters, but sitting here in the seat that had belonged to Derek was an entirely different feeling. Outside Riverstone, Diner bustled with the usual morning energy. The rich aroma of coffee blended with the scent of grilled meat. Customers lined up, placing orders, picking up drinks. But beneath the surface buzz, a subtle tension simmered among the staff. Sophie tightened the strap of her watch and whispered to herself, "This is day one. I have to prove I'm worthy." When she stepped out of the office, the quiet murmurs around the diner died down. Some employees looked at her expectantly. Others, particularly Lily and Brandon, wore openly cold expressions. Brandon leaned against the soda machine, arms crossed, muttering, "Look who's boss." Now, Lily sneered, "Let's see how long that lasts." Sophie ignored them, focusing instead on the others, the ones who hadn't pledged loyalty to Derek. She clapped her hands once to get their attention. "Listen up," she said clearly, every eye turned to her. First, she said, voice steady, "From today onward, every customer gets treated equally." "No discrimination," Brandon scoffed under his breath. Lily rolled her eyes. Sophie pressed on, "Second shift assignments, and tip distribution will be fair." No favoritism, a ripple of murmurs spread. Some employees looked surprised. Some, especially the newer ones, lit up with cautious hope. "You deserve a fair workplace," Sophie concluded, "but not everyone welcomed change." Throughout the morning, Brandon and Lily did everything they could to sabotage her. Brandon deliberately dragged his feet, making coffee, leaving customers waiting. One frustrated woman tapped impatiently at the counter. "Excuse me, I ordered my coffee 10 minutes ago." Sophie stepped over. "What's going on, Brandon?" He shrugged, just making sure it's brewed perfectly. She glanced at the order, just plain black coffee. "Serve it now." She ordered, her voice low but firm. Brandon begrudgingly handed over the cup, a mocking smirk on his face. In the kitchen, Lily wasn't any better. She burned toast, let fries go limp, and slowed down food prep. Sophie clenched her fists, fully aware of their tactics, but she didn't waver. She pulled Lily aside. "You're better than this." Lily curled her lip. "Am I?" Sophie nodded. "I know you don't like me, but don't take it out on the customers." Lily snorted. "Just wait. This place will crumble." Sophie said nothing. She turned and went back to helping Leah, the new cashier, who was still clumsy, and encouraging the younger staff. She praised the hard workers, lent a hand to those struggling, and tried to keep the diner running. By lunchtime, the tension had reached a breaking point. Orders were delayed. Customers began grumbling. Sophie stood at the counter, sweeping her gaze across the diner, calculating her next move. At that moment, Sophie Bennett had only two choices: to give up and let everything spiral into chaos, or to stand up and take back control. She took a deep breath, exhaling slowly. She hadn't come this far just to fail so easily. Evening at Riverstone Diner was suffocatingly busy. The sizzle of meat on the grill, the constant ding of the cash register signaling completed orders, and the rich aroma of crispy fries filled the air. Customers lined up at the counter, shifting impatiently from foot to foot. At times like these, there should have been smooth, synchronized coordination. Instead, it was pure chaos. Sophie stood near the counter, eyes sweeping across the restaurant, watching everything slowly unravel. Brandon deliberately moved sluggishly, pouring drinks at a snail's pace, making customers tap their fingers in frustration. Lily, over in the kitchen, was assembling burgers, sloppily, ingredients spilling out messily. A man in line shook his head and whispered to his companion. "It wasn't this bad before." The words stabbed at Sophie like a needle. She could feel the eyes of several other employees, some anxious, some simply waiting, fixed on her, silently wondering how she would respond. She had given Brandon and Lily chances to change, but it was clear they had no intention of cooperating. They wanted her to fail. Sophie stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Brandon, move faster. Customers are waiting." He raised an eyebrow and slowly lifted a cup of soda, placing it heavily on the counter. "Oh, excuse me," Brandon said mockingly. "I didn't realize we were in such a rush." Lily wasn't any better. "Maybe it's all the new rules making everything so messy," she said sarcastically. Sophie maintained her composure. "You both know exactly what you're doing. This isn't workload pressure. This is deliberate sabotage." Lily shrugged. "If you're so good, why don't you do it yourself?" Brandon smirked. "Yeah, let's see the new manager handle it." At that moment, the glass door swung open. Daniel Hartman appeared. His sharp gray suit only heightened his commanding presence. He didn't say a word, arms crossed. He surveyed the scene with a cold, assessing gaze. Sophie's heart tightened. She knew this was the moment that mattered. Without hesitation, Sophie grabbed an apron hanging by the counter, slipped it on, and jumped into action. She moved swiftly around the beverage station, filling drinks quickly and handing them to customers without missing a beat. Then she turned to the kitchen, gently nudging Lily aside. "Keep grilling. I'll assemble the burgers." Lily curled her lip but didn't block her. Sophie's hands moved with swift precision, wrapping burgers, checking orders, and calling out names with impressive speed and confidence. Within 15 minutes, the rhythm at Riverstone Diner was restored. The customer line at the counter shortened steadily. Customers received their food with smiles instead of frowns. A woman whispered to her husband, "That girl's good, should have been running this place ages ago." Daniel Hartman silently watched it all unfold. Without a word, he turned and left a clear look of satisfaction in his eyes. When the evening shift ended, Sophie summoned Brandon and Lily into the office. Brandon leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Lily sat with legs crossed, a defiant glint in her eyes. Sophie kept her voice steady. "I gave you both a chance to change. Tonight, you showed you're not interested." Brandon sighed, saying nothing. Lily sneered, "Save the lecture." Sophie crossed her arms. "Listen carefully. This is your final warning. Either do your job properly or find work elsewhere." Lily jumped to her feet. "You can't do that." "On the contrary," Sophie said, locking eyes with her, "I absolutely can." They stared at each other for a few tense seconds until Lily snarled, "This is ridiculous." She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Only Brandon remained. He stood there, torn. "You don't have to follow her," Sophie said quietly. Brandon bit his lip, then turned and left without a word. Sophie leaned back against the desk, the weight of leadership settling heavy on her shoulders. She knew the real battle had just begun. The following weekend, Riverstone Diner entered another peak hour. The air buzzed with laughter from groups of college students, the sizzle of frying pans and the clatter of cash registers. But this time everything ran smoothly. Sophie stood behind the counter, eyes scanning every corner. A week had passed since she officially took over as manager. Challenges remained, but things were starting to turn around. Newer employees adapted quickly. Even some of the old staff, once cold, had begun cooperating more. As for Brandon, he had toned down his defiance, working quietly, though there was still a hint of hesitation. But Lily was different. She wasn't openly rebellious, but Sophie knew she was quietly spreading dissatisfaction among the team. And then, in the middle of the bustling crowd, the door swung open. Derek Collins appeared. For a moment, the entire diner froze. Conversations hushed, and every eye turned toward the former manager. Derek strutted in with his usual swagger, a crisp white shirt, and that familiar smirk. But in his eyes there was no longer arrogance, only cold calculation. He scanned the room before locking eyes with Sophie. That crooked smile sent a chill down her spine. Sophie straightened her shoulders, refusing to show even a flicker of fear. Derek sauntered up to the counter, leaning an elbow on it. "Well, well, look who's running the show." Some employees paused, unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. Even Brandon, stacking plastic cups, hesitated. Sophie met Derek's gaze squarely, her voice calm. "You're not allowed here." Derek chuckled. "Relax. I'm just here for a burger." He glanced around the room, lingering a little too long on some of the old staff as if he still had a claim over them. "Mind if I order?" he asked mockingly. Sophie kept her face neutral. "Get in line like everyone else." Derek laughed softly, but his voice dropped colder. "You really think you're in control here?" Derek Collins lightly tapped his fingers on the counter, a mocking glint in his eyes. "We'll see." He tossed out the challenge before turning away. leaving Sophie Bennett with a lingering, smug half-smile. Sophie exhaled slowly, but deep down she knew this was far from over. That night, after Riverstone Diner closed, the staff slowly trickled out, leaving Sophie alone in the cramped manager's office. The glow from the single computer screen cast a harsh light over her tense face. She was reviewing the revenue reports. But the longer she looked, the deeper her frown grew. The numbers weren't just off. They showed signs of deliberate tampering. Revenue had dropped significantly over the past few days, despite steady customer flow. Complaints had surged: incorrect charges, missing orders, excessive wait times. A cold shiver ran down Sophie's spine. This wasn't accidental. Someone was deliberately sabotaging Riverstone Diner from within. She pressed her palm against her forehead, trying to stay calm. She had to find out who was behind this fast. Daniel Hartman was quietly monitoring everything. If she lost control now, she wouldn't just lose her position. She might lose the entire chance to save the diner. The next evening, everything started off normally. Customers came and went steadily. The kitchen buzzed with activity. Staff bustled, taking and delivering orders. But Sophie sensed something wrong in the air, a heaviness she couldn't name. And then the front door slammed open. A group of angry customers stormed in, fury in their eyes. A large man stomped up to the counter, slamming a receipt down. "I want to speak to the manager," he bellowed. Sophie stepped forward, keeping her voice calm. "I'm the manager. How can I help you?" The man snorted. "Explain why I was charged for 2 meals when I only ordered 1. A woman beside him raised her phone. "I placed an online order yesterday. The bill was $5 higher than the menu price." "I called, but nobody answered." Another voice chimed in. "I asked for no pickles, but everything smothered in pickles." The complaints erupted like a wildfire through dry brush. Each customer had their own grievance: overcharges, wrong orders, double billing. Sophie clenched her fists. She knew this wasn't random, and then she spotted Derek Collins. He leaned casually against a chair in the corner, arms crossed, a wicked smirk curling his lips. Sophie turned back to the angry customers, forcing herself to stay composed. "I apologize for these issues," she said. "Let me check the system and correct this for you." She worked quickly on the computer, but when the screen lit up, her heart sank. The numbers had been altered. Orders were inflated. Strange surcharges were layered onto old receipts. Someone had tampered with the system and wiped the traces. It wasn't like this before, the large man muttered, narrowing his eyes. When Derek was running things, everything was smooth. Sophie ground her teeth. She wouldn't let Derek reclaim the narrative. Lifting her head, she said firmly, "I understand your frustrations. I will personally refund the overcharges and make sure you receive exactly what you ordered." The atmosphere in the diner slowly calmed, though a simmering resentment lingered. Just then, Lily appeared from behind the counter, arms crossed. "Looks like someone's having a rough night." Sophie's voice hardened. "You knew about this, didn't you?" Lily feigned innocence. "Knew what? I just see the new manager struggling. That's all." Sophie lowered her voice. "You think causing chaos like this won't have consequences?" Lily shrugged. "I'm just helping bring things back to the way they used to be." Across the room, Brandon stood silently, his expression unreadable. He wasn't smirking like Lily, but he wasn't stepping in either. Sophie realized Brandon might not have directly sabotaged her, but he certainly wasn't stopping it either. Before she could react, the door opened again. Daniel Hartman walked in. The atmosphere inside Riverstone Diner froze. No one spoke. Every pair of eyes turned to him. Derek Collins quickly stepped forward, masking himself in a veneer of concern. "Daniel, it's a shame to see the diner fall apart like this," he said, voice dripping with false regret. Daniel didn't respond immediately. His piercing gaze landed on Sophie cold and appraising. Sophie understood perfectly. This was no accident. This was a test. If she failed to handle it, she would lose everything. That night, in the dim light of the office, Sophie was alone with the computer screen. The data sprawled before her, altered orders, inflated bills, strange surcharges. She spent nearly the entire night combing through it, and finally she found the thread. All the discrepancies traced back to a single employee account. The name on the logs, Brandon Sophie felt like she had been punched in the gut. She had trusted him. She had given him a chance. And yet there was no other option now. She picked up the phone and dialed Brandon. She said, when he answered, her voice steely, "Come back to the diner. We need to talk." A pause. Then a resigned sigh. "Okay." 15 minutes later, Brandon walked through the back door. His uniform was rumpled, his face weary and tense. Sophie turned the computer screen toward him, the blue glow reflecting in their eyes. "Explain this," she said, her voice low but full of authority. Brandon glanced at the screen and froze. "The system logs are clear." Sophie continued, her eyes never leaving his. "Don't deny it. Maybe someone used my account." Brandon mumbled, avoiding Sophie Bennett's gaze. Sophie shook her head. "The system logs the device used for each transaction. No one else but you." Brandon turned away, his fingers anxiously tapping against his leg, an old nervous habit. Sophie remained silent, patiently waiting. Finally, Brandon let out a long sigh. "I didn't have a choice." Sophie's chest tightened. "What do you mean?" Brandon hesitated, then rubbed his face as if struggling to find the words. "Lily," he blurted. "She pressured me, said it would just take a few tweaks, just enough to make you look bad in front of customers. I didn't want to, but..." His voice trailed off into silence. Sophie clenched her fists. She had suspected Lily, but she hadn't realized how deep it went. Brandon exhaled heavily, still refusing to meet her eyes. But Lily was just following orders. Sophie's eyes sharpened. "What do you mean?" Brandon hesitated, then for the first time looked her straight in the eye. It was Derek. The air in the room thickened. Derek Collins orchestrated everything. Lily was just his enforcer. He even paid off some old employees to cause chaos. Slow deliveries, incorrect charges, poor service, just enough to make it seem like you couldn't manage. Sophie's heart pounded in her ears. Brandon lowered his voice. "He wants you gone, and he's not going to stop." Sophie sat in silence, staring out at the empty parking lot through the window. The city lights sparkled coldly in the distance. She knew then this wasn't just a workplace conflict. This was war. A battle for control, and she didn't intend to lose. The next morning, Riverstone Diner simmered under a heavy atmosphere. Employees moved sluggishly, whispering nervously, casting anxious glances around. Everyone could sense that something big was about to happen. Sophie stood at the front counter, arms crossed, surveying the floor. She had stayed up all night, planning every move for today. Taking a deep breath, she stepped into the center of the restaurant. Everyone gathered around. Hesitation rippled outward. The employees slowly dropped what they were doing, forming a loose half circle. Brandon stood near the back, hands stuffed deep into his pockets. Lily crossed her arms, a defiant glint in her eyes. The others simply waited in tense silence. Sophie began. As you all know, our restaurant has suffered serious issues recently." Murmurs stirred among the group. She pressed on her voice steady. Customers were overcharged, orders sabotaged. And last night, I found out why. She clicked a remote. The large wall screen, usually displaying the menu, now flashed detailed transaction records. Every violation, every suspicious surcharge, every tampered receipt was laid bare. "I'm initiating a full audit of Riverstone Diner," she announced. "Every suspicious transaction has been documented." Lily let out a mocking laugh. "Playing hero now." Sophie didn't blink. "I'm doing this because customers trust us and because everyone here deserves a fair workplace." She clicked again. The login records appeared the same username repeated over and over. Brandon. No one needed to ask further. The tension was suffocating. Brandon swallowed hard. He stepped forward, voice hoarse. "Yeah, it was me." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. Brandon bowed his head. "I manipulated the receipts, inflated prices, but I wasn't alone." He darted a quick glance at Lily. Lily recoiled, her face darkening. "You traitor." Sophie raised her hand for silence. "Anyone else involved, confess and make it right. If not, the door's right there." Silence stretched long and thick. Then slowly, a few veteran employees stepped forward. They bowed their heads, some admitting to botching orders, others to deliberate delays. Lily looked at them with open contempt. "Cowards." Sophie remained firm. "That's your choice." The diner door swung open. Daniel Hartman entered. Immediately, every employee straightened as if yanked upright by invisible strings. Sophie turned to face him. Daniel surveyed the room, his gaze sharp, taking in the angry customers and the irrefutable evidence. Before he could speak, Derek Collins sauntered in. His face was calm, as if he still believed he held all the cards. "Oh," Derek drawled smoothly, "holding a little conference, are we?" People instinctively stepped back from him. Daniel ignored Derek and looked directly at Sophie. "How do you want to handle this?" Sophie took a deep breath. "This place deserves better. No more. Derek, no more." "Lily," Derek scoffed, "you think you can get rid of me?" Sophie didn't flinch. "You already got rid of yourself." Daniel spoke up. "You made a grave mistake, Derek." He clasped his hands behind his back, his voice freezing. "I don't tolerate corruption, and I certainly don't forgive sabotage." He delivered the verdict sharply. "Lily, pack your things, you're fired." Lily gaped. "You can't, I can." Daniel cut her off, and I just did. Furious, Lily stormed out. Daniel turned back to Derek. "And as for you, we'll be speaking privately." Derek clenched his jaw, but didn't argue. Inside the manager's office, the air was so thick it could choke Daniel. Hartman stood by the window quietly watching the flickering lights outside. Sophie Bennett sat upright, hands gripping tightly. Across from her, Derek Collins lounged back in his chair, his arrogance undiminished. Brandon perched nervously at the edge of the desk, his eyes darting. Several veteran employees' witnesses Daniel had summoned stood silent in the corners. Tense silence. Finally, Daniel turned around. "Let's not waste time. I want an explanation." Derek exhaled slowly, as if feigning patience. Explanation for what? Daniel narrowed his eyes. "For the entire sabotage operation." Derek stiffened. He pulled a key from his pocket and threw it onto the table with a sharp, clanging noise. Without another word, he turned and walked out of their lives forever. Silence blanketed the room. Daniel shifted his gaze to Lily, who immediately swallowed hard. "Look, I was just following orders." Daniel cut her off. "Enough. You're fired too." Lily's face flushed bright red with anger, but she didn't dare argue. She stormed out the office door, slamming shut behind her. Sophie exhaled softly in relief. Daniel turned to Brandon. "You made mistakes too, but because you took responsibility, I'll give you one chance." "Only one." His voice was cold. "If you slip up again, there won't be a second chance." Brandon nodded quickly. "I understand. I won't let you down." Daniel nodded, then turned back to Sophie. "You handled this very well." Sophie lifted her chin. "I just did what needed to be done." A faint smile crossed Daniel's lips. "Which is exactly why this place belongs to you." Sophie looked at the key on the table and picked it up. It wasn't just an object. It was a symbol of the control of the change she had fought for and won. Outside, Derek Collins disappeared into the night, his figure a picture of complete defeat. Sophie watched him go, then turned back inside where she knew the future had already changed. The next morning, the crisp air wrapped around Riverstone Diner. Sophie unlocked the door, taking in the stillness of a city, just waking up. Everything had changed here in just a single week. She switched on the lights and breathed in deeply. For the first time in a very long time, this place truly belonged to her. As employees began trickling in, the old tension was gone. They chatted lightly, preparing for the new day with a spirit of genuine cooperation. No more sidelong glances, no more whispered hostilities. Only a spirit of teamwork. Brandon arrived on time as he had every day since. He bowed his head slightly in greeting, then rolled up his sleeves and jumped into work, even taking the initiative to guide a new employee. Sophie smiled faintly. He was trying, and so were the others. Even the older staff members who had once doubted her were beginning to accept the change. They saw, now that she hadn't come to dominate, she had come to build a fair place, something they hadn't even realized they needed until now. Customers returned as well. At first, cautiously, but soon they noticed the difference. Orders were accurate, service was fast. There was no longer any favoritism. No special treatment for some, while others were ignored. Every customer, whether a sharp-suited businessman or a grease-stained worker fresh off a shift, was treated the same, and everything ran smoothly. That afternoon, Sophie's phone rang. On the other end was Daniel Hartman. "Meet me at the cafe." She knew exactly which cafe he meant. Sophie walked in and spotted Daniel at the familiar window table. A steaming black coffee sat in front of him. He looked up and gave her a small nod. She sat down waiting, so he began. "Do you have any regrets?" Sophie answered without hesitation. "No, I know. I made the right choice." Daniel studied her, then nodded. A pleased smile flickered across his face. He pulled an envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table to her. Sophie raised an eyebrow and opened it. Inside was a check, a sum far larger than she had ever imagined. She hesitated. "What's this?" Daniel leaned back in his chair, calm. "A reward for the way you handled everything." Sophie shook her head. "I didn't do it for the money." Daniel's eyes softened. "I know, that's exactly why you deserve it." He lifted his cup, taking a sip. "Rotten systems like the one we just dismantled survive because people believe they can't be changed. But you proved that if you have the courage, change is possible." His voice deepened warmly. "People like Derek survive because they count on others being too afraid to stand up." He smiled. "But you dared, and you won. You should be proud of what you're doing. If you ever need anything, you know where to find me." With that, Daniel Hartman left the cafe, leaving. Sophie Bennett sitting alone with the check in her hand. She looked down at it again. The amount on the check wasn't just a financial reward. It was recognition proof that all her efforts had been worthwhile. That evening, after locking the doors of Riverstone Diner, Sophie stepped back and looked up at the glowing sign. This place had once been her battleground. She had faced obstacles that had seemed insurmountable, and she had won. But more importantly, she had changed something. And if she could change Riverstone Diner, maybe she could do even more. A smile bloomed on her lips. Sophie turned away, her heart already stirring with thoughts of the journeys ahead. 1 month after officially taking over as manager at Riverstone Diner, the restaurant had undergone a complete transformation. The toxic atmosphere was gone. Employees worked with energy. Laughter replaced weary whispers. Customers noticed the change too. No more delays, no more favoritism. Everything ran smoothly and fairly. Sophie stood near the cash register, watching the dinner rush unfold. The scent of freshly grilled burgers and crispy fries filled the air. A few regulars waved at her from their tables, nodding with satisfied smiles. She should have felt content, and truthfully, she was proud. But a small part of her remained cautious. The past she knew had a way of creeping back. That night, after cleaning up, Sophie returned to the office to finish paperwork. A plain envelope with no sender's name lay quietly on her desk. Her heart clenched. She slowly tore it open. The handwriting was familiar sharp. Derek Collins. She read, "You think you've won. Not yet. You destroyed my career. You took everything from me. I won't forget. And I won't forgive." No direct threats, but the message was crystal clear. Derek hadn't accepted defeat. Sophie folded the letter and slipped it into the bottom drawer. She wouldn't let it haunt her. Not today. The sound of the front door opening pulled Sophie out of her thoughts. Evan stood at the threshold, a wide smile lighting up his face. "Evan," Sophie exclaimed, hurrying over. "What are you doing here this late?" He shrugged his worn hoodie, slouching on his frame, excitement radiating from him. "Just finished my final exam. I think I did really well." A bright smile spread across Sophie's face. "That's amazing. You've worked so hard." Evan beamed, flexing his arm playfully. "I had a role model, you know." Sophie laughed. "Oh, so I'm a role model now." Evan leaned against the desk. "You bet you didn't just keep your job. You made this place the best it's ever been." Sophie glanced out the window toward the now empty diner. He was right. This fight hadn't been just about survival. She had built something better for everyone. Evan nudged her arm. "So what's next?" Sophie took a deep breath and stepped outside. The night sky shimmered with city lights. The faint hum of traffic echoed from afar. She looked up at the Riverstone Diner sign once more. A month ago, she had stood there wondering if she could survive. Now she wondered how far she could go. The next morning, sunlight streamed brightly through the glass windows. The restaurant buzzed with fresh energy. Employees arrived early, chatting warmly as they prepped for the busy hours ahead. Everyone worked with genuine enthusiasm. Laughter echoed softly. Sophie stood behind the counter, coffee cup in hand, watching it all. She had fought, and she had won. Just as she took a sip, the front door swung open. Daniel Hartman walked in. Gone was the tension from the early days. He simply nodded politely at the staff and made his way toward her. Sophie set down her cup and wiped her hands on her apron. "Didn't expect to see you so soon," she teased. Daniel smirked. "I like surprises." "Sounds dangerous," she joked. He pointed toward an empty table by the window. "Have a seat." They settled in morning sunlight, bathed the room, highlighting Daniel's serious expression. "You've done very well." "Sophie," he began, "better than I even expected." Sophie tilted her head, smiling. "Sounds like a compliment." Daniel chuckled quietly. "It is." Then his tone grew more serious. "You didn't just fix one restaurant. You changed the entire culture here." He paused, then asked, "Have you ever thought about managing more than one location?" Sophie's eyes widened. "What?" Daniel nodded. "I want you to oversee several Riverstone Diner locations in this region, not just in Atlanta beyond." Her heart raced. This offer was far beyond anything she had ever imagined. For years, she had fought just to be heard. Now she was being asked to build something even greater. She drew a deep breath. "That's a huge responsibility." Daniel nodded. "It is, but I believe you can do it." He leaned forward. "So what do you say?" Sophie looked out the window. The city was waking up. Memories of dark nights and near defeats rushed back. She thought of Evan's trusting eyes, of the miraculous turnaround at Riverstone Diner. She had built something good here. Maybe she could build even more. Turning back to Daniel. Sophie smiled slowly. "When do I start?" That evening, when she returned home, Evan was already there, laptop on his lap. "Hey, sis," he called out. "How was your day?" Sophie leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, smiling. "Pretty amazing," she said, her voice full of hidden excitement. Evan narrowed his eyes mischievously. "That's it, just pretty good." Sophie Bennett smiled, shrugging slightly. "All right, maybe a little better than pretty good." Evan propped his chin on his hand, eyeing her suspiciously. "You're hiding something, aren't you?" Sophie sighed, then finally admitted Daniel. "Hartman just offered me a new position, a big step forward." Evan shot upright. "How big?" She chuckled softly. "I'll be overseeing multiple Riverstone Diner locations in the region." Evan's eyes widened in amazement. "Whoa!" Then his face lit up. "So basically, you'll be like a regional boss." Sophie laughed, something like that. Unable to contain himself, Evan threw his arms around her. "I knew it. I knew you could do it." Sophie squeezed him tightly, feeling the full weight of the moment. A long road filled with doubts and fears, and now she had her answer. The next morning, Sophie stepped out onto the front porch. The golden morning sun stretched across the city, warm rays weaving between buildings. She stood there for a moment, breathing in the crisp air. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be new challenges, new barriers. But the fear that once haunted her was gone. She had built a solid foundation, and now she was ready for longer journeys. With a smile, Sophie Bennett walked forward, striding confidently into the brilliant sunlight. Sophie's story wasn't just a journey about reclaiming justice. She had proven that strength doesn't come from titles, but from the courage to stand up, fight, and create change. From a small, overlooked waitress, underestimated and dismissed through every steady step through integrity and perseverance, Sophie Bennett hadn't just survived, she had changed an entire rotten system. This wasn't just a story of revenge. It was a quest for justice. It was a realization of self-worth. It was the refusal to let others define her life. And what about you? Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to stand up for what's right? Share your story with us in the comments below. And if you love stories about rebirth, inner strength, and second chances, don't forget to hit subscribe and join us for many more incredible journeys ahead.